My son said I was no longer welcome at his house. Then I found my granddaughter's school shoes under my workbench. At 1:17 on a Thursday morning, I found my 9-year-old granddaughter's school shoes under my workbench. 4 nights earlier, my son had looked me in the eye and said, "You're not welcome at our house anymore." The shoes were small, black, and polished except for the familiar scrape across the left toe. Sophie dragged that foot whenever she was tired. I had repaired the buckle twice, so I knew the shoes before I even bent down. They had no reason to be in my garage. Neither did the pink lunch bag tucked behind them. I pulled it out and found a yellow note clipped to the handle. The handwriting was Sophie's, large letters, uneven spacing, the D in Dad written backward before she had corrected it. "Dad, don't wake Grandpa. I'll be quiet." An alert from the garage had woken me 9 minutes earlier. When I checked the camera, the picture was a flat gray square. I had pulled on my boots and gone outside expecting a technical problem. For several seconds, I stood there listening to the refrigerator hum in the little back room of the garage. Then I heard a car door close beyond the side wall. By the time I reached the driveway, 2 red taillights were disappearing past the maple trees. I did not know whether my son had just left with Sophie or whether he had left her behind. That was the first question. The second was worse. Why was Evan hiding his daughter in my locked garage after ordering me to stay away from his family? My name is Frank Mercer. I was 62 years old that night, old enough to know that panic makes a man careless and pride makes him stupid. Unfortunately, I had plenty of both. I went back inside and checked the garage properly. The main room held my workbench, tool cabinets, and an old truck I had been restoring slowly enough to call it a hobby. Behind a partition was a heated office with a fold-down cot, a half bathroom, and a small refrigerator. Evan had helped me finish that room 6 years earlier. He had his own code for the side door. The cot was down. One blanket had been folded, the other was pushed into a warm heap against the wall. On the desk sat a glass with a paper straw in it, a purple hair tie, and a library book from Sophie's school. Someone had placed a sheet of printer paper over the little security camera I used when I traveled. That bothered me more than the shoes. An emergency visit did not require covering a camera. Hiding did. I checked the keypad history on my phone. Evan, 1:08 a.m. The same code had opened the garage at 11:46 the night before and at 5:51 Wednesday morning. There were entries from Tuesday, too. They had not come for one desperate hour. My son had been using my garage for at least 2 days. Now my granddaughter's belongings were there, and neither had said a word. I called Evan. The phone rang until his voicemail answered. "It's me," I said. "I found the shoes. Call me before I call somebody else." I almost called him again. Instead, I called his wife. Rachel answered before the first ring had finished. "Frank?" Her voice was low and wide awake. "Did I wake you? Have you heard from Evan?" That told me more than any answer she could have given. "Why?" "Because he took Sophie after school yesterday and he has ignored every message that contains a question he doesn't like." "Is Sophie supposed to be with you?" Rachel exhaled slowly. "She is supposed to be asleep in her own bed. She is also supposed to be in class at 8:10. If Evan contacts you, tell him that. Did you throw them out?" There was a pause. "Is that what he told you?" I asked a question. "No, I did not throw anyone out. And Frank, if he comes to you, do not help him turn this into a war." I looked toward the shoes under my workbench. "I haven't seen him," I said. It was technically true. I had seen only his taillights. It was also the first dishonest thing I did that night. Rachel must have heard something in my voice. "If Sophie is there, tell me now." I said I haven't seen Evan. She went quiet. Then she said, "That is not the same answer." The call ended. I remained in the garage with the phone in my hand, angry that Rachel had questioned me and more angry that she had been right to. Behind a cabinet of wood finishes, I found Sophie's folded school uniform. Under it was a toothbrush, a pair of pajamas, and a small blue suitcase. The suitcase was still zipped. At 6:42 that morning, before Evan returned my call, an email appeared from Sophie's school. "Your authorization to collect Sophie Mercer has been removed. I had been on that list since kindergarten. I picked her up on Wednesdays, bought her a grilled cheese sandwich, and helped with homework until her parents finished work. No explanation." No temporary note, removed. I read the message 3 times, then printed it because men of my generation still believe paper makes an insult more official. At 7:36, I parked across from Sophie's school. I told myself I wanted to make sure she arrived. The truth was less respectable. I wanted to see which parent brought her. Evan's gray SUV turned into the drop-off lane at 8:04. Sophie climbed out wearing white sneakers with her uniform. Her hair had been brushed, but the part was crooked. Evan leaned across the console and called something after her. She turned, smiled for half a second, then saw my truck. The smile disappeared. She did not wave. Instead, she touched one finger to her lips. Then she hurried through the school doors. That small gesture settled it for me. Someone had taught my granddaughter that loving me required secrecy. I drove home and waited in the garage with the side door open. Evan arrived at 9:12. He stepped inside carrying 2 coffees and stopped when he saw the shoes lined up on my bench. At 37, my son had my height and his mother's way of looking guilty before he had decided whether to lie. "You went through our things?" he asked. "Your things were under my tools." "I was going to tell you." "When?" "After you changed the locks." He set the coffees down. "I didn't change anything." "You covered my camera. I didn't want you getting an alert and driving out here in the middle of the night. So you protected me from waking up by breaking into my garage?" "I used my code. At 1:08 in the morning. You always said that code was for emergencies." "Then tell me the emergency." Evan looked toward the open door. He seemed to be checking whether anyone had followed him. "Rachel made her choice," he said. "I made mine." "What choice?" "Denver." That single word carried me back 4 nights. We had been eating Sunday dinner at Evan and Rachel's house when Rachel put down her fork and said she had accepted a position at a children's hospital in Denver. Not applied, not interviewed, accepted. Her start date was 2 weeks away. Evan stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. "You said we were still discussing it?" "We have been discussing it for 5 months," Rachel replied. "You keep calling silence a decision." Then she said the sentence that changed the entire table. "Sophie and I fly out Tuesday. You can join us when you're ready." I should have kept my mouth shut. Instead, I said, "A marriage isn't a moving truck you order first and explain later." Rachel turned to me. "This is between Evan and me. It stopped being between you when you put Sophie in the sentence." Evan told me to stay out of it. I heard him, but I did not stop. 2 years earlier, during another bad stretch in their marriage, I had told Evan that Rachel would eventually make a decision so large he would either surrender or leave. It had been the kind of prediction a father makes when he wants to sound wise, and a daughter-in-law remembers because it makes her feel watched. At that dinner, I made the mistake worse. "I told you this day was coming," I said to Evan. Rachel pushed her chair back. "There it is. You have been waiting to be right about us." I said that was ridiculous. The problem was that it was not entirely ridiculous. Evan walked me to the porch and closed the door behind us. "Go home, Dad. She cannot decide where your daughter lives without you." I said, "Go home? I'm trying to help you." "No. You're trying to win an argument you started 2 years ago." Then he said it. "You are not welcome in this house anymore. Do not come back until I invite you." 4 nights later, he was standing in my garage asking to hide there. "Did Rachel tell you to leave?" I asked. Evan rubbed both hands over his face. "She told me that if I wouldn't come to Denver, Sophie was going without me." "That isn't what I asked. I packed." "Did she tell you to pack?" He picked up one of the coffees, then put it back without drinking. "Why does that matter?" "Because your wife says she did not throw you out." His head lifted. "You called her?" "I called the mother of the child sleeping in my garage. Sophie was safe. Safe children are allowed to turn on the light." That landed. Evan looked away. "He told me they had a mediation appointment Friday morning. He needed 2 nights, maybe 3. He did not want Rachel knowing where he was because she would come over and perform being reasonable in front of me." "And what are you performing?" I asked. "I'm trying not to lose my daughter. By making her sleep behind my table saw." "It was 1 night. The keypad says Tuesday, too." He said nothing. I told him Sophie would sleep in my guest room that night with the door unlocked and the curtains open. He could take the smaller room across the hall. Rachel can't know we're here, he said. You're 37. You can hide from your wife if that is the man you want to be. Sophie is 9. She does not hide from her mother in my house. Dad, that is the price of the room. His jaw tightened. You always need a price. He took the coffee and left. At 3:20 that afternoon, Evan brought Sophie back from school. She entered through the garage first, still wearing the white sneakers. When she saw me, she froze beside the workbench. Hey, Bug, I said. She looked at her father before answering. Hi, Grandpa. Your room is ready inside. Are we allowed? Allowed to what? Be in your house. I looked at Evan. He studied the floor. You have always been allowed in my house, I told her. Dad said we had to be quiet because you would make us go home. Evan stepped forward. Soph, why don't you take your bag inside? My black shoes are here. I know. I need them tomorrow. I know. And Tuesday. Evan's voice sharpened. Take your bag inside, please. Sophie obeyed, but she stopped at the door. Are we still going somewhere Tuesday? We'll talk later. She looked at me, waiting for an answer I did not have. Then she went into the house. What happens Tuesday? I asked. Rachel starts the new job. That is not what Sophie asked. Rachel enrolled her in a school out there? Without you? Evan took out his phone and showed me an email confirming that an application had been received by a school in Denver. Sophie's name was at the top. She decided everything, he said. The job, the apartment, the school. She told me I could follow when I was ready, like I was a package with delayed shipping. For the first time since I found the shoes, his story seemed to fit the evidence. I felt the old anger rise in me, the anger of a father watching someone corner his son and call it compromise. Then Sophie stays here, I said. Evan looked relieved. That should have warned me. He had not come to my garage because it was the only safe place. He had come because I was the one person most likely to say exactly what I had just said. Inside, Sophie had placed her blue suitcase beside the guest bed without opening it. Don't you need your clothes? I asked. Dad says we might go home. When did he say that? Every time I ask. On top of the suitcase was a school folder. A page inside had the title My Safe Place. Sophie had drawn my garage. The workbench ran across the bottom. A small girl stood between two doors, one labeled Mom and the other Dad. There was no person beside her. I closed the folder before Evan came in. At 4:15, Rachel called me again. Evan saw her name on the screen. Don't answer, I answered. They're here, I said. Evan swore under his breath, not loudly, but loudly enough that Sophie heard from the hallway. Rachel did not raise her voice. Is Sophie safe? Yes. May I speak to her? Evan shook his head. I handed the phone to Sophie. She took it with both hands. Hi, Mom. There was a pause. I know. Another pause. No, I brought my library book. Then Sophie looked at her father. I don't know. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Can you ask Dad? Evan took the phone. We will see you at mediation. He listened for perhaps 5 seconds, then ended the call. She's coming, he said. Rachel arrived 28 minutes later. She came alone, carrying Sophie's winter coat and a white envelope. She hugged her daughter first. She did not try to pull her toward the door. She simply held on until Sophie let go. Then she put the envelope on my kitchen table. Before we start, she said, Frank needs to see what you showed me last night. Evan's face changed. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with where you chose to take our daughter. Inside the envelope was a printed screenshot of a text conversation between Evan and me. It was dated 2 years earlier. Evan had written, she gave me until Friday to decide whether we refinance or sell. I can't breathe in this house. My answer was underneath. If she corners you with an ultimatum, leave before she learns it works. My door is always open. Your code will never change. I remembered writing it. I also remembered what I had left out of the message. Rachel had been asking for a decision for 6 months because their adjustable mortgage was becoming unaffordable. Evan had ignored every deadline until she finally gave him one. I had turned a complicated marriage into a simple warning because simple warnings make fathers feel useful. Rachel tapped the paper. He showed me this when he packed Sophie's bag. He said you had been preparing him for this for years. That isn't what I meant, I said. What did you mean? I looked at the words again. There was no hidden meaning. I meant exactly what I wrote at the time. Evan pulled out a chair. You told me to leave if she tried this. I told you that during a different fight. It is the same fight. She makes a decision, gives me a deadline, and calls me unreasonable if I don't agree. Rachel's voice remained controlled, which somehow made every word sharper. I removed Frank from the pickup list because you told me Dad can collect Sophie after you get on the plane, and there is nothing you can do about it. I turned toward Evan. Did you say that? I was angry. That is not an answer. Yes. Rachel looked at me. I was not punishing you. I was trying to make sure no one collected our daughter as part of a contest. The printed school email in my pocket suddenly felt less like an insult. Evan pushed back from the table. You submitted a transfer application without me, because the deadline was Monday. You signed Sophie up for a school 1,600 miles away. I started an application. You told her we were moving. I told her it was possible. You told her I chose to stay here. Rachel's face tightened. Then a small voice came from the doorway. Dad said Mom chose Denver. Sophie stood holding the school folder against her chest. No one spoke. She looked at Rachel. You said Dad chose Grandpa. Then she looked at Evan. If Mom chose Denver and Dad chose Grandpa, who did I choose? Evan stood up so quickly his chair struck the wall. Sophie, come here. She stepped backward. Rachel pressed her fingers to her lips. I had spent most of that day deciding which adult was telling the truth. Sophie had just shown me that all three of us were asking the wrong question. She opened her folder and laid the drawing on the table. Mrs. Howard said a safe place is where you don't have to worry about adult problems. She pointed to the girl between the two doors. I didn't know which door to draw. The room went silent. I knelt so my eyes were level with hers. You should never have had to choose one. Are Mom and Dad getting divorced? Rachel started to answer, but I raised one hand. They do not know yet, I said. And anyone who tells you they do is guessing. Where am I sleeping? That was the only question in the room with an answer. Rachel said, at home with me. Evan said, she is staying here tonight. Sophie closed the folder. I stood. No, I said. Neither of you gets to answer alone. They both looked at me. Sophie can sleep in my guest room if she wants. Rachel can take the room across the hall. Evan, you can have the couch. Tomorrow morning, the three of you go to the appointment you already made. You want me to stay here? Rachel asked. I want Sophie to go one night without being carried from one adult position to another. Evan shook his head. This is our family. Then stop using my garage as a border. He stared at me. For once I did not add anything. Sophie chose the guest room. Rachel accepted the other room. Evan took the couch. At 10:30, after the house was quiet, I found my son sitting alone at the kitchen table with the Denver school email open on his phone. She enrolled her, he said. She says it was an application. Same thing. I held out my hand. He gave me the phone. The email did confirm that Rachel had submitted Sophie's information. At the bottom, in smaller text, it said, enrollment would remain pending until the school received records and consent from both parents. Did you read this part? I asked. She still started it without me. That was wrong. Evan waited. But it is not the same as taking Sophie without you. You heard her Sunday. I heard both of you say things meant to hurt. He looked almost offended. Whose side are you on? Sophie's. That is what people say when they don't have the courage to choose. 2 years earlier, I might have agreed. I slid his phone across the table. Why did you come here? Because you said your door was open. The front door was open. You chose the garage. I knew you'd make me explain. You brought a 9-year-old into an unlit room because you did not want to explain? He looked down. I needed one person not to tell me I was crazy. There it was. Not shelter. Agreement. You didn't come because I was safest, I said. You came because I was most likely to tell you that you were right. His expression hardened. And were you going to? I already did. That is what scares me. He stood and left the table. At 6:15 the next morning, I found Rachel dressed and sitting on the back steps with a mug of coffee. She said she had not slept. Neither did I. Evan thinks you invited me to trap him. Evan thinks any room where someone disagrees with him is a trap. Rachel gave a tired laugh, then looked ashamed of it. I should not have said Sophie and I were flying Tuesday, she said. Were you? I am. Sophie was never booked on that flight. You let us believe she was. For about an hour. An hour was enough. Rachel nodded. She explained that after Sunday dinner she had calmed down and left Evan a voice message. She apologized for announcing the move in anger. She proposed that Sophie remain in her current school through the semester while Rachel started the job alone. Evan could visit Denver, look for work, or decide that he would not move. They would use the time to make a real decision. He never answered, she said. Maybe he didn't hear it. Rachel unlocked her phone and played the message. It was time-stamped Sunday at 11:06 p.m. Her voice on the recording sounded exhausted. Evan, I should not have said Sophie and I were leaving Tuesday. I am leaving Tuesday because I signed the contract, but Sophie can stay through the semester. I won't move her without an agreement. I'm angry, but I don't want her choosing between us. Please come upstairs so we can stop doing this through closed doors. The message continued for another 30 seconds. Rachel admitted that beginning the school application without him had been wrong. She asked him to attend mediation Friday. How do you know he received it? I asked. Because Monday morning he quoted the transcript back to me. That changed the story again. Evan knew Rachel had withdrawn the ultimatum before he brought Sophie to my garage. He had not hidden the message because it was irrelevant. He had hidden it because it damaged the version of the story he wanted me to believe. At breakfast, Sophie ate toast while the adults avoided looking at one another. At 7:30, Rachel drove her to school. Evan watched from the front window. You played him the message, Rachel said to me before leaving. Not yet. Why not? Because I want him to tell me. After the car disappeared, I returned to the kitchen and placed my phone on the table. Rachel had sent me the recording. Before I play this, I said, is there anything you want to tell me? Evan did not pretend to misunderstand. She changed her mind. When? Sunday night. Before you used the garage Tuesday? Yes. Before you told me she was taking Sophie? He stared at the table. Yes. Why? Because she only changed the plan after she made me look weak in front of you. So you needed to make her look worse. No. Then help me find a kinder explanation. His chair scraped backward. She had already applied for the job, interviewed 3 times, found an apartment, and started Sophie's school paperwork while asking me to discuss it. By the time she offered a semester, the decision was made. Her decision about her job was made. That affects all of us. Yes, and you had 5 months to answer. He looked at me as if I had betrayed him. You sound like her. Maybe because that part is true. I reminded him of every time he had delayed the conversation. He had said work was busy, then Sophie had a school play, then Christmas was too close, then Rachel's mother was visiting. He had treated delay as a veto. Rachel had treated exhaustion as permission. Neither was compromise. What did you tell Sophie when you packed? I asked. That her mother chose Denver. Did you tell her about the message? She is 9. Exactly. Rachel told her I chose you, and Rachel was wrong. He waited for the rest. So were you. For a long time, Evan said nothing. Then he asked, what am I supposed to do? Walk back into that house and act like none of this happened? No. Walk into mediation and admit what did. She won't. You cannot control her part. That is easy for you to say. No, it isn't. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and took out the screenshot Rachel had printed. I made this easier for you to do, I said. I taught you that leaving was strength and staying in a difficult conversation was surrender. I was wrong. His eyes moved to my old message. You believed it then. I did. What changed? I found Sophie's shoes under my workbench. That afternoon before the mediation appointment, Rachel and Evan agreed to meet at my house for 20 minutes, not to settle the move, not to settle their marriage, only to decide what they would tell Sophie after school. Rachel admitted first that she had spoken as if Sophie were part of her job offer. She had convinced herself that because the Denver position would improve their finances and give her better hours later, the move was automatically best for everyone. I planned so far ahead, she said, that I stopped noticing I was planning alone. Evan admitted that he had used Rachel's worst sentence after she had withdrawn it. I wanted Dad to hear the version that made sense to me. You wanted him on your side, Rachel said. Yes. The words seemed to cost him something. Then they looked at me. I told them the truth I least wanted to say. When you came to the garage, I was glad. Evan frowned. Not glad that you were hurting, I said. Glad that my prediction had come true. For a few hours, being right mattered more to me than asking what Sophie needed. Rachel's expression softened, but I did not want forgiveness from her in that moment. I wanted the admission to remain uncomfortable. I helped create a place where Evan could hide from his marriage and call it protection. I continued. That place is closed. Evan glanced toward the garage. You changed my code? No. The code is for emergencies. Avoiding a conversation is not one. They attended mediation without me. That was one of the hardest useful things I did. I wanted to sit in the room, organize the facts, and stop either of them from rewriting what had happened, but my presence would have given Evan somewhere to look whenever he disliked an answer. So I went home and moved Sophie's school shoes from the workbench to the front hall. At 4:30, two cars came up my driveway. Rachel arrived with Sophie. Evan followed separately. They had agreed that Rachel would handle school pickup so the parking lot would not become another place where Sophie had to interpret which parent had won. The adults sat with her in my living room. Rachel spoke first. I am starting my new job Tuesday, she said. You are not moving Tuesday. Sophie looked at Evan. Dad is coming home tonight, he said. That does not mean everything is fixed. It means we are going to talk in the same house instead of making you wonder where we are. Are we moving to Denver? We do not know, Rachel said. Do I have to choose? No, they answered together. Sophie looked at me. I nodded. The agreement they reached would not have looked dramatic from the outside. There was no courtroom victory, no one lost a house, no police arrived, no secret document ended a marriage in 10 minutes. Rachel would go to Denver alone for 6 weeks and return on weekends. Sophie would remain in her school and her home. Evan would visit Denver twice, not as a promise to move, but as a promise to make an informed choice. They would attend counseling remotely and return to mediation before deciding anything about Sophie's school. It was temporary, it was imperfect, that was why I trusted it. Rachel restored my school pickup authorization, but we added one condition. Neither parent could use me to collect Sophie during a disagreement without telling the other. Evan apologized to me in the garage before they left. I shouldn't have covered the camera. That is not the apology I need, he nodded. I used you. Yes. I thought you would understand. I did understand. That was the problem. He looked toward the cot. Were you really going to let us stay? At first. What changed? Your daughter drew herself between two doors. He lowered his head. I didn't see what we were doing to her. Neither did I. That mattered. It would have been easy to stand above him as the wiser man after finally recognizing the obvious. But I had lied to Rachel, hidden evidence, and almost turned my garage into headquarters for my son's side of the marriage. I was not the judge. I had simply stopped volunteering as a weapon. On Tuesday morning, Evan drove Rachel to the airport. Sophie went with them so goodbye would not happen through a text message. That afternoon, I collected Sophie from school. She climbed into my truck wearing the black shoes. The buckle works, she said. It always worked. Dad said you fixed it. A long time ago. She swung her feet above the floor mat. Mom says I can sleep at your house Saturday. Because they are arguing? No, because it's Saturday. That was the first normal sentence anyone had spoken about my house all week. When we arrived, she went into the garage and stood beside the workbench. This is where you found them? Right there. Were you mad? Yes. At Dad? At your dad? At your mom? At myself? I had plenty to go around. She considered that. Were you mad at me? Never. I wrote the note because Dad said you would wake up and ask questions. He was right about that. I didn't want questions. Neither did he. She ran one hand along the edge of the bench. Mrs. Howard says questions are how you find out what the problem really is. Mrs. Howard sounds exhausting. Sophie laughed. Then she reached into her backpack and handed me the yellow note. Dad, don't wake Grandpa. I'll be quiet. You can throw it away, she said. I folded it once. I think I'll keep it. Why? To remind me that being quiet and being safe are not the same thing. We heard a knock at the front door. It was Evan. He could have entered through the garage. His code still worked. Instead, he had come to the front of the house and waited to be invited in. When I opened the door, he lifted one shoulder. I wasn't sure whether my code still worked. It does. I thought knocking might be better. It was. He came inside. His marriage was not magically repaired. Rachel still wanted the Denver job. Evan still did not know whether he could build a life there without resenting her. Some conversations ended in progress, others ended because both of them were too tired to continue well. But they stopped sending Sophie to carry conclusions from one room to another. 6 weeks later, Rachel returned for mediation. Evan had visited Denver twice. They had found a neighborhood they both liked, and two, they did not. Rachel had discovered that the new schedule was not as flexible as promised. Evan had learned that his work could travel more easily than he had claimed. They still had a decision to make. This time, they were making it with the same facts. The blue suitcase returned empty to the top of Sophie's closet. The fold-down cot returned to the wall. The camera in my garage remained uncovered. And the space under my workbench went back to holding nothing more important than sawdust. I still keep Sophie's note in the top drawer, not as proof that Rachel was wrong, not as proof that Evan came back, as proof of something harder for a father to accept. Sometimes helping your adult child means opening a door, and sometimes it means refusing to let him hide behind it